I'm going to start with the Ionian Islands. And the reason I start here is that the Ionian Islands had the first stamps issued for any part of Greece. But first, here are the islands. The Greek name in Greek lettering is on the left. And in English, we call them Corfu, Paxos, Kefalonia, Lefkada, Ithaca, Zante, and Kythera. There are some alternative names as Santa Maura and Cerigo, I guess. These are Italian versions of the names. The one curious thing, most of these are simply transliterations of the Greek, except for this one, Kerkyra, which is called Corfu in English. Now, I've been aware for a long time that modern Greek pronunciation is very different from the ancient Greek. And you often have words that sound differently from how they're spelled. But this is kind of extreme. I wondered, how do they get Corfu out of Kerkyra? And the answer is they don't. This is not a version of the word Kerkyra. It's a different name with a whole different origin. In Greek, the island is Kerkyra, but everybody else in the world calls it Corfu. And that's because the Byzantine name for the island was Coryphos, or Island of Peaks. It's a hilly place, and the Venetians, who controlled the island for centuries, built a fortress atop of the peaks, or Coryphae, then gave that name to the island. This is a picture of the capital city, which is called Kerkyra. And you can see what a mountainous place it is. And in the center of the picture there is the Venetian fortress, the old Venetian fortress built on two hilltops adjacent to the city. The Italian name, with a spelling change to Corfu, is another version of Coryphos, has been adopted in English and every other language that I could check on. The Germans, the French, everybody calls it Corfu. All right, so here's a map that shows where these islands are. The Ionian Sea is the sea here to the west of Greece. Italy is over here. I didn't put it in because it's a little too far away, but and farther north, they call this body of water the Adriatic, separating the Italian boot from the Dalmatian coast. But down here is called the Ionian Sea. The Ionian Islands would be everything starting with Kythera, and this tiny little one down here is called Antikythera. Everything to the west would be the Ionian Islands. On the other side, these are different. These are the Cyclades, as they're called. Down here are the Dodecanese in this area. And then there are certain major islands, Lemnos, Mytilene or Lesbos. This is Chios, Ikaria, Samos, and Rhodes. Those are the major ones. This Saseno is considered the northernmost of the Ionian Islands. Saseno is right at the point where the Ionian Sea becomes the Adriatic. North of Saseno, it's called the Adriatic. It's the only one that's not part of Greece. It is part of Albania. Here's Corfu. You can see it's to the west of Epirus, which is this part of Greece, and right across the water, a very short distance from Albania. Paxos is very small, Lefkada, Ithaca, Kefalonia, Zakynthos, or Zante, as it's usually called in English, and Kythera is way down here. The first map that I saw of the islands included only these, and I knew that there were supposed to be 7. So I wondered, well, okay, where's the 7th island? And it turns out it's way down here off the southern tip of the Peloponnesian Peninsula. Now, this name, Ionian, is curious because while it currently refers to this body of water, in ancient times, Ionia was this area over here, the coast of Anatolia. And the Ionian Sea was what we now call the Aegean Sea. I can't explain how this change came about. It could be that originally the entire sea to the west of Anatolia was called Ionian, and then later the name Aegean was adopted. But in any case, this is how the term is used today. As with most areas of Greece, there's a long and complicated history. So things have changed many times. The 7 islands that I've named are the major islands. There are many, many smaller ones. All right, these are the stamps. The first stamps issued for any area of Greece, issued by the British, who controlled these islands from 1815 at the end of the Napoleonic Wars. They had been Venetian for centuries. Then the French took over during the Napoleonic Wars. The French Navy occupied the Ionian Islands, and from that point until 1815, there were several transfers of power, but they ended up in the control of the British from 1815 until 1864. So these were produced in 1859. And the first question I have when looking at these stamps is, what's with this belt around the head of the queen, this belt buckle? This is the insignia of the most noble order of the Garter, one of the most highest honors that can be bestowed by a British monarch. And you see here, it's got the same belt and the motto of the Order of the Garter, Honi soit qui mal y pense. In French, of course. At the time that this originated, 1348, during the reign of King Edward III, the ruling class in England spoke French. Honi soit qui mal y pense means shame to him who thinks ill of it. There are several stories about how this came about. The main one that I've heard is at some kind of a fancy dress ball. One of the ladies had a problem with her garter, and it's slipped down, and she was embarrassed. And the king, in order to sort of save the situation, said these words: "Honi soit qui mal y pense." Shame to him who thinks ill of it. Now that's just, that could very well be an apocryphal story, but somehow or other, this became the motto of this honorary society. The Order of the Garter consists of the monarch, the Prince of Wales, and up to 24 companions, as they're called, who are selected at the personal discretion of the monarch. This is one of the few things that the King of England or Queen of England has personal control over, that doesn't have to consult anyone else. It's not up to Parliament, it's just up to the monarch. So you see on the stamps, they've put this, essentially this garter belt around the head of Queen Victoria. You notice there's no denomination. Different denominations were to be distinguished only by the colors. The first 2 stamps issued were the blue and the red. They were to be for 1 penny and 2 penny values. The original plan was the other way around, that the red stamp was supposed to be 1 penny and the blue stamp 2 penny. And they actually have watermarks that indicate this. These are the backs of the stamps. You can just see the watermark. The left-hand stamp is the blue stamp, and you can make out just barely the watermark, which is in numeral 2. It's like this, numeral 2, and on the red stamp, it's a numeral 1. So it was originally intended that the red stamp would be for 1 penny and the blue for 2, but analysis of the postal history of all the covers that use these stamps have proven beyond any doubt that, in fact, the values were reversed. The blue stamp was used as a 1 penny stamp and the red one as a 2 penny stamp, and that's how they're arranged in the catalogs. I tried using postmark reveal to see if I could get a clearer picture of the watermarks. I wondered whether maybe it would be useful for watermarks as well as cancellations, and I think you might be able to see the watermarks a little bit better here. This is one of the examples from postmark reveal. Here's another example. It's not really very, very different from what you see just looking at the back of the stamp. Perhaps the lines of the watermark are just a tiny bit clearer with postmark reveal.
Watermark food bring them out more?
I think it would, yes.
Be able to put the stamps on a lighted surface and just shine light through them and then photograph that with your iPhone. Sometimes that shows watermarks very clearly.
This is another image from postmark reveal, and this is what you would see if you used watermark fluid. In other words, the watermark shows up as light lines on a dark background, the 2 and the 1. And then later, almost as an afterthought, the orange stamp valued at half a penny. So the orange stamp is the more valuable, the most valuable of the 3. Fewer of them were printed. It was, as I say, an afterthought. These were printed late in 1858 and then sent to the island in early 59. They weren't printed until March of 1859. And there was only one printing. It was never renewed. So there ended up being far fewer of them. The halfpenny stamps have the problem that the color often changes. Many of the stamps you will see in collections or in dealer stocks will have turned brown. This is a result of sulfurization. It's often referred to as oxidation, but the chemical that actually causes the change of color is sulfur. On this brownish stamp, you can still see a few little traces of orange. Right here is a little bit that hasn't turned brown. The halfpenny stamp is distinctly smaller. You can probably even tell from this picture. It's distinctly shorter than the 1 or the 2. And it's not, they were all printed from the same plate. Only one plate was ever made. So the only way I can think of to account for this is that the paper has shrunk. Different paper was used. The 1 and the 2 penny stamps were issued on a very strong paper with watermark. These later stamps, the halfpenny were printed on a much thinner paper without watermark. All I can say is that it must have shrunk. And I've looked at the catalog pictures as well. And the catalog pictures also show the orange stamp distinctly smaller than the others. Now, if anybody else has another way of explaining this, I'd like to know. It's pretty clear to me that there are no forgeries here. Forgeries of these stamps do exist, but they're very easy to detect. Onelia, the Italian forger who also made engraved forgeries of the large Hermes heads of Greece, created forgeries of these, but he was quite an artist, but he was not particularly concerned about ensuring that his stamps couldn't be distinguished. There are very, very easy ways to tell when you have an Onelia forgery, and these are all genuine. Now here's something that I found, a part of a whole sheet of these stamps. That they were printed in sheets of 120, 12 rows by 10 columns. This is from a book that I found in the library of the Collectors Club of New York. I happened to be doing some volunteer work there, helping them to unpack things from their recent move. And I took the time to look through the books about Greece. I found this article from The Stamp Lover, 1925, by Fred J. Melville. And included with the article is a large plate, which is simply a replica of the printing plate, a full sheet of these stamps, with some notations about varieties. There are re-entries, a favorite topic of Arnie, I believe. And here we go again with, this is the position 84 re-entry. And you can see that what has happened, there are little marks at the bottom margin and on the left. The re-entry marks are going to be below and to the left. And you can see here, the line of the oval is repeated here and a little bit over here on the left, as you would expect it. Some of the letters show some of this doubling. The O, for example, here, there's some lines that are re-entry marks, and below the A and the T are lines left over. Now, my understanding of re-entries is that they occur when one of the cliches of the printing plate has some problem, and they decide to redo it. So they burnish out the impression of the engraving and reapply the transfer roll to create the image on the plate, on the cliche. And if they don't completely burnish out all of the previous impression, then some lines from the original impression are left over and they reappear. And this is what we call re-entry. Now, have I got that right, Arnie?
Yes, that's one of the, there's different forms of re-entries, but that's one classification, the unburnished or improperly burnished and a re-enter that it's in a slightly different position. It's usually because the first time they apply the transfer roll, it's not in the right position, and you can see a shift here. There's usually a horizontal or vertical shift, and we see it here too.
Well, here's the other one that the author of this article identified. This is position 96. And here you can see a problem with the letter I. Apparently the original I was at the wrong angle. And so there's a doubling of this line at a different angle. The re-entry marks are not as apparent on this. It's mainly the letter I. Okay, well, so now we're on to the next stage of the stamps of Corfu. During the First World War, the Serbian army took refuge on Corfu. They were defeated by the Austro-Hungarian Empire in Serbia, and they retreated and escaped over the Albanian mountains and took refuge, and then set up a Serbian government in exile on Corfu. These are stamps used by the Serbian government in exile. The postmark here is not actually a town postmark. It's a cancellation that's often seen on these stamps. And this is information that I got from a friend of Ed's.
Richard Stevens.
Richard Stevens. He was quite an expert on these stamps. He had an exhibit concerning the Serbian government on Corfu with many examples of the stamps, including ones used on cover. The postmark is, and of course, I'm not going to be pronouncing it correctly in Serbian, but something like Ministarska Poštanska Stanica, Ministerial Postal Station. And according to Richard Stevens, these are favor cancellations. In other words, this is not something that was used on a letter going through the mail. He says that the 2 centime stamp, in fact, the 1, 2, and 3 centime stamps were not actually sold by the post office on Corfu. There was no particular use for those low denominations, but they were brought to Corfu by French stamp dealers who wanted to get examples of these stamps canceled and marked post-Serb to sell to stamp collectors. Here's an example of a piece of postal history. This is, according to Richard, a genuine example. In this case, using Greek stamps, which was unusual, but it was permitted. And here you see a very clear example of the full cancellation, the Ministerial Postal Station, dated 1918, shortly before the end of the government in exile. This is a postcard with a picture of the Serbian army plunging into the water here. I'm sure they were glad to get to Corfu after their trek across the mountains. And this is from a postcard of scenes from the war. The postcard was produced long after these events, but the Serbian government in exile lasted from 1916 until 1918. So all these guys were living on Corfu and bathing in the waters. Now, these these stamps are the result of a brief event. There was a brief Italian occupation of Corfu in 1923. It only lasted 1 month. And as usual with Italian occupations, even if they only last for a few weeks, they manage to get out a few stamps. I would imagine that finding any of these stamps on a legitimately used cover would be quite difficult. Something happened on the island. There was an assassination of an Italian general, I believe. The Italians were incensed about this and they marched over. And of course, Corfu is, right across the water from Italy, and occupied the island just for 1 month. And at that time, by the way, the Greek government was in considerable disarray. This is only a year after the events of 1922, when Greece suffered a catastrophic defeat in its fight with Turkey. The forces of Kemal Ataturk in Turkey drove the Greeks out of the Anatolian mainland. And this created havoc, and there was a revolution in the government. Those who had been in charge were blamed for losing this war. And if you look at the stamp issues for Greece in 1922, it's a whole lot of overprints during a period of instability. The overprints say Revolution 1922, when there was, the change of government due to the loss of that war. Here are some more of these. This is the total issue of Italian occupation of Corfu. These are overprinted and surcharged with Greek currency, lepta and drachmae. Now, during World War II, Corfu was again occupied by Italy. When the Italians first arrived, it was May of 1941. First thing they did was outlaw the use of Greek stamps, and they gathered up all the stamps and overprinted them with the name Corfu, and then offered them for use on the island under their occupation. Overprints were carried out in Corfu, Kefalonia, Ithaca, and Zante, or Zakynthos. These were used temporarily until the arrival of Italian stamps overprinted Isole Ionia. Looks to us in English like Isole or Joni, but no, it's Ionia. That's the Italian version of Ionian. So here are some of the stamps overprinted Corfu. This was done very quickly, and they just used a simple typeface with the word Corfu. It's not entirely clear why they had to do this, but this is what they wanted to do to indicate that it was under their authority, not the Greeks. They essentially were attempting to detach the Ionian Islands from Greece, which the mainland of Greece was occupied by the Germans. And the Italians had control of some of the islands, and their idea was to administer these islands completely separately from the mainland of Greece, as though they were no longer part of Greece. Here's one with a cancellation, no doubt a favor cancel, and cancellation Kerkera, Greek version, 16th of June of 1941. So that's within the period May to August when the stamps were used. There were other overprints on other islands. They took pairs of stamps and overprinted them, in large type, Italia, and then Occupazione Militare Italiana Isole Kefalonia e Ithaca. So these were for Kefalonia and Ithaca, two islands that are very close together, would be easy to administer as a unit. This is Argostolion is the name of a city on Kefalonia where the overprinting was done. So these are often called the Argostolion overprints. Here's another one. This has, again, a favor cancel. It's just Argostolion cancel, 26th August, 1941. This is just before the arrival of the Isole Ionia stamps. So here's a piece of a fragment, which, could be from an actual letter. it's very difficult to make out what's going on here. I can't read the dates, for one thing. You can see 8/11 here, but it's not clear what that refers to. Are we talking about 11 p.m. or the 11th month? It would be unusual to have the 11th month over here and no year. So as I say, I can't tell you what this is. The location here, Hagia Euphemia, is that's Saint Euphemia, and this is a saint of the Catholic Church and the also of the Orthodox Church, Greek Orthodox. She was a Christian martyr who was killed by the Romans in 303 AD. Has a number of sites, monasteries, and so forth named after her. There are two of these Hagia Euphemia cancellations. The same thing here, and once again, I can't read the date on this one either. This mark appears to be a censor mark because the inscription koinotes apos ephemia means something like state security. And there's something that looks like it might be an eagle in here or some kind of insignia. So I take that to be a censor marking. This is a picture of the monastery of St. Euphemia on Corfu. Finally, these stamps were overprinted in the same period for Zante. And it's Occupazione Militare di Zante. And these numbers 1, 5, 19. Now, they were issued in 1941. So what is this 19? I had to look that up. It turns out that the Italian fascists, just like the French revolutionaries back in the French Revolution, started their calendar, started a whole fresh calendar with the advent of their regime. So Mussolini's March on Rome was 1922. And year 19 of the Era Fascista would be 1941. And that explains why we have 1, 5, 19. Here's some more. This is the rest of the set of these stamps. This is on the what's called the historical issue of 1937. Beautiful set of Greek stamps. Of course, with this overprint, you can't really see the images. So some other time we'll go into what's on the stamps. Finally, the Isole Ionia stamps arrived. These are the ones that the Italians prepared for their administration of the Ionian Islands. And again, I don't have any of these used or on cover. It would be nice, but I would imagine they're quite expensive. After the Italians made their armistice with the Allies in 1943, the Germans took over the occupation of the Ionian Islands, and for the most part, they simply reverted to the use of Greek stamps. During the German occupation, which lasted from 1941 to 45, or 44 really, a number of Greek stamps were issued that just say Greece. They don't have anything, they don't say anything on them about the German occupation, but they were issued under the German administration. The Germans essentially just turned over the stamps to the Greek authorities and let them proceed to issue Greek stamps. And they were used after the Italians left the Ionian Islands, except for one place, and that would be Zante, where this crude overprint was created. 210, October 2nd, 1943, briefly after the Germans took over from the Italians. This is a controversial issue. I have an article, another thing that I got from the Collectors Club library, an article about these that says they were declared by the Hellenic Philatelic Society to be completely illegitimate, and they should not appear in any Greek catalogs because they were not approved by any appropriate stamp issuing authority. They were created by a low-level postal official on Corfu, and they probably saw very little use. They were technically valid for 1 week in October of 1943. Well, that's it.